Today our lecture will have two halves. The first half will talk about hypnosis and memory, which addresses both a practical or applied issue about the use of hypnosis in recovering memories, but also the theoretical issue of what can hypnosis achieve that we couldn't achieve without it. And in the second half, we will ask, why are some people more hypnotizable than others? And that has both an applied and a theoretical aspect to it, in the sense that given that some people are more hypnotizable than others, that has implications for clinical practice, for hypnotherapy, but also for our understanding of what hypnotic response consists in. So, dealing first with memory, I have a series of questions for you. So let's see the extent to which you agree with the following claims. First one, hypnosis can help someone remember something they could not remember otherwise. Just put your hands up if you agree with that claim. All right. And if you disagree with it? Okay. So we'll be considering the truth of that claim in this lecture. Hypnosis can make people tell the truth about things they would normally lie about. What do you think about that claim? Put your hands up if you agree with it. And if you disagree? Quite a few people disagree, and some people don't know. About hypnosis is a good technique for police to use to refresh witnesses' memories. Do you agree with that? Yes? Two of you anyway. And if you disagree? Quite a few people disagree. Well, these are claims that I think a lot of people generally do agree with. These were the percentage of people who agreed when Amanda Barnier asked undergraduate students at the University of New South Wales. So these claims, the first and the last claim, are the ones we're going to consider in detail. And thanks to Amanda Barnier for these slides, which I borrowed from her, and some of the later slides as well. Hypnosis is used extensively to recover memories, both in a forensic context and in a clinical context. So what I want to go through is how it is used and consider the evidence for what is actually achieved. You can use you can use hypnosis as an age regression technique. You can tell people to go back to a previous moment in time, maybe to a time when they were witnessing some event, some crime that had been committed, and to relive it. And often in a forensic context, the person is told that the mind is like a tape recorder. It records all the details, and all they need to do is to play that back, and they will be back there at the time and see everything very vividly. So this is a transcript of what a forensic hypnotist actually said in a legal case in Australia. So this is how the suggestion goes. Now you'll find that the memories of that particular night have been blocked out because there was a very unpleasant memory. Just tell yourself that you do want to remember what happened. And whatever happened that night, the memory is going to come back into your mind. As I put my hand on your head, all those memories are coming back, and the fog is lifting, and you can remember every single thing that happened. No, the memory's there. The memory's there. Let it come forward. So place his hand on the subject's head. Everything that happened is remembered. It is all there. Just think to yourself, I want to remember. I'm going to allow these memories to come back. Very clear now. The memories are coming back now. What happened as the light got closer and the voice said, stop or I'll shoot? and so on. Now, in these clinical contexts and forensic contexts, what you get when a person is given suggestions like this is indeed you get back a lot of detail. And the hypnotized subject will tell you a lot of things, and often they'll tell you very confidently. So from the point of view of the police or the clinician, this can be very convincing, because in everyday life, when somebody confidently tells you, this is what I remember, it's very persuasive as evidence that that's what happened. But the problem is in clinical contexts, so the person goes back and remembers some abuse that they didn't remember before. Or in the forensic context, the person goes back to the crime and gives you some key bits of evidence, and they might recall it confidently. We don't really know what happened, so it's very hard to evaluate the accuracy of what the person is saying, except for the fact that they're confident in it. So what we need are studies in which we present subjects with material, so we know what was presented, and we can assess the accuracy of the subject. Now, many studies have been done using all sorts of different sorts of material. So I'm going to present you one representative study. This study happened to use pictures of everyday objects, but other studies have used videos of events and all sorts of other sorts of material, and we have a pretty consistent picture. In other words, what I'm going to present you now is not a matter of controversy. We have a pretty consistent picture of what hypnosis does. So in this study by Nogrady et al., there were 60 slides were presented, maybe a table, a cat, and so on. Everyday objects that had very clear names. In the first test phase, subjects are simply asked to recall the names of what they've seen, say cat, table, and so on. And then they said, okay, now try and recall those names again. Just tell me everything that you saw, and maybe some new things will come to mind, and tell me them as well. Then in the second test phase, there's 2 more attempts. Half of the subjects are given a hypnotic suggestion that the pictures will appear easily and effortlessly in the mind's eye. So there's a suggestion for hypermnesia, which means, if you want to just giving a fancy Greek name to the suggestion for improved memory. Or control subjects just attempted to recall again. No hypnosis was given. Then subjects are brought out of hypnosis, and either the control subjects had 2 further recall attempts. So the control subjects are just trying to recall again and again and again and again. That's all they're doing. The hypnotized subjects are given a post-hypnotic suggestion and said, when you come out of hypnosis, you'll have very clear memory for what happened. You'll be able to recall easily and effortlessly the things that had happened. So they're given 2 more attempts with the post-hypnotic suggestion. Now, remember there are 60 items. This is the first recall attempt. These are the control subjects, so no hypnosis is involved at all for these subjects. So the first interesting thing to note is that even when you don't use any memory improvement procedure, and you don't use any hypnosis, you just ask the person to try and try again, there is actually, over 6 recall attempts, a pretty substantial increase in memory simply by giving it another go. So one thing to bear in mind is, let's say a person recalls some information without any hypnosis, let's say in a criminal investigation, and you're asking a witness to recall what happened, they recall some things. If a hypnosis procedure is used at a later point in time, you would expect the person to recall some new information just because they're trying again. But if you don't have a control group, you would never know that an increase in accurate recall would simply arise from asking the person to try again. And in an uncontrolled situation, say in a police investigation, where you get some information out of a witness after using hypnosis, and you know the information they're giving you is correct because you know some of the details, that could be very persuasive, right? You say, oh, we used hypnosis, and I know this bit is correct in what the person said. They didn't say it before. It'll be easy to attribute that to the hypnosis. So this illustrates the importance of using a control group. And it also illustrates, by the way, if you don't recall something straight away, just give yourself a little break and try again later. And it's surprising how much more you can recall just by giving it another go. And then this is the hypnosis group. So this is correct items recalled. And we see the hypnosis doesn't benefit in terms of the number of correct items recalled. Yes, they are getting better, but you expect people to get better with successive recall attempts anyway. Now, just based on that, you might say hypnosis is it's not making people recall things any better, but it's not doing really much harm. We're not getting a significant difference. But let's look at the number of incorrect items recalled. For the control subjects, they do recall some incorrect items, but not very many. They say some things that weren't there, in other words. And these are the hypnotized subjects. We get a dramatic increase in the number of incorrect items recalled. It's a good doubling of the incorrect memory of the control subjects. Now, what's even more worrying is if we look at the confident errors. So subjects gave confidence ratings after each of their recall attempts. And for the control subjects, no more than about one incorrect item was given with confidence. But for the hypnotized subjects, we have about 5 of the items incorrectly recalled are given with confidence. In other words, what happens when you're told that you've received a procedure that will dramatically improve your memory, and subjects have every confidence in that procedure, they begin to mistake their imagination for memory. So it seems to them that when they simply see something in their imagination, they say to themselves, this must be memory, because I've just been told that I'll see clearly everything that really happened. So confabulation is mistaken for memory. The normal relationship between confidence and accuracy that exists to some extent is destroyed by hypnosis. So hypnotic hyperamnesia, so that means an increase in memory, is an apparent, not an actual increase in memory. But notice it will be apparent. It will seem like, if you didn't know what actually happened, it will seem like, from the hypnotized subject's behavior and reports, it will seem like you've improved memory. So imagine you're a clinician and you believe certain things must have happened in this person's past because that's your theory of what causes this sort of psychological condition. Maybe you have a theory that all eating disorders are caused by past sexual abuse or alien abduction or something like that. If you use hypnosis to recover these memories and you get confident recall of them, it's going to seem to you like hypnosis has worked wonders. But the new material reported during hypnosis is often incorrect. And what's most worrying about this is it makes people inappropriately confident. So this is one representative study, but there are many studies like this. As I say, this is not a controversial topic. So now in many states in America, if a witness has been hypnotized, the testimony is not admissible as evidence in court. In the UK, this is not has not been set down in law, but nonetheless the Home Office advises not to use hypnosis to recover memories from witnesses, unless you've run out of all options, and this might give you some cues. So in that case, you could use hypnosis to try and extract something out of the person, but then you'd want to follow it up and verify the information that you got. So I think let's go back to the claim I made in a previous lecture that hypnosis does not give the subject some abilities they didn't have anyway. We see that that also applies in the memory case. It doesn't give people better memories that they didn't have before. In fact, it gives them worse memories. And it's probably people's strong beliefs and expectations that hypnosis improves memory that works against the usefulness of hypnosis in enhancing memory in the way that it's typically used. Because when people believe that the procedure has been applied that dramatically improves their memory, they're willing to take confabulation and imagination as cases of memory rather than simply imagination. Nonetheless, as I say, it seems compelling and persuasive when a witness tells you something with confidence and says, yes, no, I remember, this is what happened. We take a first-hand witness who saw something, who tells you confidently, this is what I saw. Generally in everyday life we take that as persuasive, right? So it's the same for the police when they get a witness saying, no, I'm sure this is what happened, this is what I saw, it's persuasive. And so the use of hypnosis in memory continues in police work and in the clinic. And that can have unfortunate consequences. So consider this case. In North Carolina, an elderly female schoolteacher was raped, tortured and murdered. And there was a suspect they had called Thornley, and he was convicted on the basis of the evidence that had been acquired through hypnosis, particularly because Thornley, through hypnosis, mentioned a rake, which had been kept confidential. And so they said, well, he's mentioned a rake. No one knew there was a rake involved on the scene at the time. He must be guilty. But Thornley only described the rake after the following interaction in hypnosis. Thornley says, seems like I grabbed something and I ran back to... I walked most of the way because I was so tired. The police instruct the hypnotist via a note to ask about a rake. What did you grab? Oh, base of something. Was it a rake? I don't know, it could have been. Where did you get the rake from? I think I got it from the yard of the house. I was so mad. What were you doing with the rake? Running down at them. Seems like I was fighting them. So, this is a leading question. In the context of hypnosis, the hypnotic subject has been fed a piece of information. Was it a rake? This is a question. We don't get a straight answer to that. But then, after that, it's embedded misleadingly within the question, in a leading way, as if we can take for granted that it was a rake. Now, in fact, we know that even outside of the hypnotic context, when you give people leading and misleading questions, you can distort their memory. So that's a known fact of psychological work on memory. If you say to people, where did you get the rake from? Often people will start to imagine they saw a rake, even without hypnosis involved. And other experiments have shown, especially with highly hypnotizable people, that in the hypnotic context this effect is even stronger. When you ask leading and misleading questions in hypnosis, the leading and misleading effect of those questions is even stronger than outside of the hypnotic context. And this illustrates the particular danger of using hypnosis in a memory recovery situation. You have to be even more careful in how you ask questions than when you're not using hypnosis. So I would say on the basis of this, there's no evidence at all to convict Forney in that the rake was not mentioned or taken for granted by Forney until it was given to him in a leading and misleading way. Now, so far, you might say, what you've done is to, for example, in the case of the rake, Forney said he grabbed something, the base of something. What you've possibly done is to convert something that was perhaps rake-like into a rake. You've distorted the memory a little bit. But could you construct a completely false memory, a memory out of thin air, using hypnosis? And the answer is that you can, and you can do that in a half-hour experiment in the lab with just normal undergraduates. In other words, people not motivated to solve any clinical problems, but people just taking part in experiments. So, for example, in this experiment, the subject nominated the night the previous week they'd slept solidly. So they initially declare they'd slept right through and nothing had happened during the night. Then they hypnotically age regressed back to the night and told, I want you to tell me whether you hear some loud noises that may sound like backfirings of a car or a door slamming, some loud noises. Listen carefully and tell me if you hear them. So now the leading or misleading question is about a whole event that didn't happen. Do they wake you up? Perhaps you look at your clock and see what time it is. Tell me what the noises sound like. How many noises do you hear? Are you getting out of bed? And do you think they might be important? Your mind works like a tape recorder and has probably recorded that information. Later on, when you'll be out of hypnosis again and you think about that particular night, you will remember clearly everything that happened on that night. Then after hypnosis, 34% of the subjects maintained the noises had actually happened on that night. And that effect was particularly strong for the people who were highly hypnotizable. Subjects were then debriefed and told this was just an experiment, actually nothing happened. Remember, you said you'd slept solidly on that night. But most of the subjects who apparently recalled that event said, no, they did happen. Sometimes you do wake up and you hear noises, and that's what happened to me. So it looks like a false memory had been implanted out of nothing. In fact, this experiment has been replicated in different sorts of ways. For example, implanting a false memory of being lost in a mall, in a shopping mall in America, when they were a little child, when the subject had previously claimed that that event had not happened. So age regression is a subjectively compelling experience. If you say to a subject, go back to this time, go back to when you're 5, the subject can feel like they're 5 again. They might write in a childish way. They might act how they think a 5-year-old acts, and have a compelling subjective experience of being 5, of watching the crime again, of waking up in the night and hearing various sounds. But it's not as if they have gone back to that time in any real sense. And it's not as if when you take them back to when they're 5, they are actually thinking and acting like 5-year-olds really act. So some interesting work has been done looking at whether people really behave like children of 5, 6, 7, 8. And one way of doing that is looking at tasks like tasks developed by Piaget. Some of you may know the Swiss psychologist Piaget, who was brilliant in coming up with tasks to show the surprising inability of children at different ages. He developed them on his own children, but we can replicate, when you follow the procedures he lays out, we can replicate them on children generally. For example, if you take some pieces of plasticine and you get the child to say, of 6 or 7, that these pieces are exactly the same volume, and then you flatten one of them out so that it's like a very thin pancake, and then you say, when we put this in a glass of water, will the water rise to the same extent or to more or less with one of them than the other? And children think that when you change the shape of the bits of plasticine, it changes how much the water will rise. So in Piaget's terms, they don't show conservation of volume. In other words, reshaping things in the child's mind of that age changes the volume of space that the plasticine occupies. Now, the interesting and good thing about Piaget's task, and that's just one example, for current purposes, is if you ask adults, how do you think children will behave on those tasks? Adults think children will understand these things and do a lot better than they really do. So that's really useful for the sorts of experiments we want to do, because you can then age regress children back to various ages, say in primary school or infancy, where we know the subject's beliefs about how children do at that age mismatch how children actually do. And what you find is, on the Piaget tasks, what people do when they hypnotically age regress is they behave how they think children behave, not how children actually behave. So it's not as if when you use age regression that you recover the way the mind is structured at that age. What you do is you have people behave according to their beliefs. But that's not to say, I want to reiterate the point of the first lecture, that the children, that the hypnotic subjects are faking. The experiences are still subjectively compelling. It's just that with hypnosis you don't acquire any ability to recover information or ways of thinking that you didn't already have. Now, when you hypnotize people and age regress them, you can regress them back to events that people can't normally remember. So most people have difficulties remembering before about age 5, 6, 7. After 5, 6, 7, most people have something like a narrative of sequences of events that happen that's sort of complete. Before that, you tend to have just snapshots. This little event happened, this little event. And you don't have this sort of continuous narrative. But with hypnosis, especially with highly hypnotizable people, you can say, go back to this age. You can go back to being born, and people can give you convincing narratives of the whole birth experience. But you can go back before being born. You can go back to previous lives. And people will happily tell you about what happened in previous lives. A disproportionate amount of famous people are remembered. I had a friend in Scientology, which also takes people back to past lives, who knew 30 people who'd been Jesus Christ. We can also take people back to incidents in adulthood that they initially say never happened to them. But some therapists have theories that psychological disorders are caused by, for example, alien abductions. They say, so that according to the clinician, the reason why you have these problems is because you're abducted by aliens who've inserted various probes, dropped you back, and wiped your memory of it, but we have techniques that we can recover these memories. Or they might have a theory that psychological disorders are caused by satanic ritual sexual abuse, where there might have been upside-down crosses burnt and chickens sacrificed, and sexual abuse occurred. And I know you can't remember it now, they say, but it did happen when you were very young, and we have the techniques to recover this. And indeed, people do come up with all these memories, and if it's easy to do it in an undergraduate who's not motivated, imagine how much easier it will be in a clinical context when a person's gone to see a hypnotherapist and they want to make sense of their symptoms and whatever it is they're gone to see the person about. They want a narrative that explains why they have the eating disorder, why they have the anxiety, why they have the phobia, etc. And they want the therapy to work, and the therapy is an authority figure, the therapist is an authority figure, and the therapist says it's because of this. But if you're told that these memories were recovered by hypnosis, that should reduce your confidence in the accuracy of the memory than if hypnosis wasn't used. So, in short, hypnosis isn't a great tool for recovering memories, and it's a tool that should be used very cautiously. Maybe it would be good in a situation where you've simply run out of cues. You're at a complete dead end in a clinical forensic investigation. And so you're willing to try anything that might dredge up any details that might be right. And then the material you got from the hypnosis, you don't treat that as the evidence, you treat that as a starting point for finding further evidence along those lines. And in a clinical context, you might use hypnosis in a situation where you're not concerned about the accuracy of the memory. For example, maybe not to induce a memory, but a dream. If you're a Freudian type therapist and you want a dream to interpret, well, hypnosis is a great tool because all sorts of things might come to mind that then could be used clinically. But if you're interested in accurate memories, then one should be advised to not use hypnosis. Okay. So now let's move on to the last half of the lecture, which is suggestibility. So as I said before in the first lecture, people vary in their response to hypnotic suggestions, and if you want to measure how responsive people are, what you have to do is take people through a number of hypnotic suggestions and see how many they pass. So these scales here, the Harvard scale, the Stanford and the Waterloo, take people through 12 suggestions. It takes about a good hour to administer, and then you see how many suggestions did the person experience. And on these scales, you can either look at the extent to which the person, either by their own ratings, which actually is pretty reliable, or in the case of the Stanford, the assessment of the hypnotist, the extent to which the person behaviourally responds. For example, with a magnetic hand suggestion, that your hands are like magnets and being attracted together, you can see if the hands move more than a certain number of inches. And if so, you say they pass the suggestion. You can also take subjective ratings from the person, the extent to which they actually compellingly felt a force that was pulling their hands together. Now, the hypnotic suggestibility measured in this way seems to be something that's very stable. like an aspect of personality. So after 25 years, the correlation between second set of testing, the first set of testing, is 0.75. And I put a scatter plot here, not of the actual data, but it's found a program that generated scatter plots that illustrate what 0.75 looks like. And this is what a correlation of 0.75 looks like. So there's a bit of scatter and noise there, but you see a very clear positive relationship that's easily discerned by the naked eye. So there's something stable and interesting to be explained about suggestibility. Suggestibility lies on a what's often called a bell curve, or a normal distribution, where we can take the top 10% of people to be the highs. That's a normal criterion. They'll respond to even difficult suggestions, like suggestions of hallucination or delusion. So when you see on TV a TV hypnotist suggesting people will see things that are not there, will not see things that are there, or will have mistaken beliefs, that is, delusions, only 10% of people will reliably respond to that sort of suggestion. So when you see on TV an apparent 100% success rate, that's highly misleading. That's just TV. That's not reality. 10% of people will not respond at all, or barely at all, to any suggestion. And most of you will be somewhere in between, where you'll probably respond to motor suggestions, for example, magnetic hands, but find it very difficult to respond to hallucinations, amnesia, post-hypnotic suggestion, these cognitive and perceptual suggestions. But what causes these differences? And I'll say at the outset that it is a bit of a mystery. We don't really know why there are these stable differences in your ability to distort your own sense of volition and reality. But it does seem to have a genetic component. So one of the early studies here looked at identical twins. So those that have exactly the same genetic material, and non-identical twins who share 50% of the genes. And you see here that the correlation in hypnotizability between the two twins is higher for the twins that have the same genetic material rather than only 50% of the genes in common. So in fact, one can use that difference to work out a heritability, which is 0.64. So there's a substantial genetic component, but genes aren't the full story, because even identical twins that have exactly the same genetic material have a correlation of only 0.5. So there are both genetic and environmental components that determine a person's hypnotizability. Now, one suggestion that comes up, say particularly in everyday conversation about hypnosis, people might say, oh, particularly a person who's skeptical or doesn't want to be hypnotized, that might have what's almost a fear that being hypnotizable is a matter of being gullible or weak-minded or something like that. Well, this is something that has been investigated, and I just present here one of the earliest studies, where a number of tests to do with how much people conformed to social pressure. So Moore used something she called an influenceability test. First of all, the subject made a judgment on a series of case studies that subjects were given, and then given false information about what their peers thought was the right answer in these cases. And then you see how much does the judgment change when you think your peers are saying something different to yourself. And conceptually, something very similar here. If you, in darkness, see a stationary light, you don't see it as stationary, and you can try this for yourself. Instead, you see it jiggling around a little bit, like that. And that's called the autokinetic effect. So when in darkness you see a light, it seems to move a little bit. subjects were in groups, and the other people in the group were actually stooges, and when they were asked to estimate how big was the motion that the light appeared to make, they gave inflated estimates of that motion. Then you see if the subject is influenced in their estimates by what the group is saying. In other words, does the person respond to social pressure? Is this the basis of hypnotic response? Being susceptible to social pressure. In addition to these tests, there was a couple of questionnaires, a social desirability questionnaire, which asked questions like, do you ever lie? Well, everyone has told a lie at some point. So if you say, do you ever lie? No, not me. That's a social conformity answer. It can't be the right answer. You're just giving that answer because you want to fit in, you want to conform to social norms. And acquiescence is the tendency of a person to simply say yes. So if you have a question there, the extent to which you say yes, 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 yes is the acquiescence measure. Now, this study actually came out, this test came out significant, all the others non-significant. And in a way that's sort of representative in that when these studies have been done, the correlations come out very small and just occasionally significant, but small correlation pops up. And if you want to know what 0.2 looks like as a correlation, it looks like that. Right? So the answer is that there may be no relationship between hypnotizability and social conformity, but to the extent there is, because it sometimes pops up, it's small. And this is an overestimate in the sense if we averaged over many studies, the population correlation would come out as less than 0.2. In other words, as something that's very tiny indeed. So social conformity might play a tiny, tiny role, but it can barely explain any of the variance in hypnotizability. Some other measures have been a bit more successful. So, for example, Tellegen and Atkinson came up with a questionnaire they called absorption, which asks you questions like, questions about the extent to which you like to be absorbed in imaginative activities. So, for example, when you read a book, do you often get so absorbed in the novel that you forget where you are and you're just completely in the book? Do you like to look at the clouds and see shapes and patterns? Do you like to look in the fire and see shapes and patterns in the fire? There's a correlation of about 0.3 of absorption with hypnotizability. And probably another way of getting at exactly the same issue is provided by the study by Wilson and Barber. They started with a group of people they called fantasy prone. And these are people who live in a make-believe world. They live in the real world. They're not psychotic. They're not deluded. They know what's imagination and they know what's real. But they have a very rich imaginative world, which is fully as part of their life as the real world is. And they can keep them separate. But for them, when they get absorbed in this imaginative world, it's as real to them as the real world. It's the willing suspension of belief. And in the day-to-day life, their fantasy world is progressing as much as the real world is. They can have out-of-the-body experiences. About 10% of people have out-of-the-body experiences. That doesn't mean they've actually left the body. It means you have the experience as if of being outside of the body. So you might see your body from the ceiling, for example, looking down at her. And may also have intense religious experiences. And they may also be able to bring themselves to orgasm by fantasy alone. Well, people who have been identified as fantasy-prone in this way are disproportionately highly hypnotizable. So there's a relationship between fantasy proneness and hypnotizability. But not all highly hypnotizable people are fantasy prone, by the way. It's just that fantasy prone people are disproportionately highly hypnotizable. So maybe this is one way of being highly hypnotizable, but it's not the only way of being highly hypnotizable. So people develop questionnaires of fantasy proneness where you could just say yes or no to a bunch of questions to measure the extent to which you have a rich imaginative life that's important to you, as well as external reality. Rathbun and Kirch used the fantasy proneness questionnaire and also measured expectancy for each suggestion. So you can be asked, if you're given a suggestion that your arm will be very light and it will rise, to what extent do you expect to have some response to that suggestion? And also ask about motivation. How much do you want to, if you're given a suggestion that your arm will be very light and will rise in the air, to what extent do you want to respond to that suggestion? And here they got a correlation of 0.5 with expectancy. And the two bars here are when the hypnotic suggestions are given with an induction beforehand or without an induction. And it doesn't really make a lot of difference. The biggest correlation was with expectancy. That has a correlation of 0.5. I should say that's on the high side, so expectancy ratings are often taken in studies. More typical would be around 0.3, and this shows you what a correlation of 0.3 looks like. You can probably just about discern that with a naked eye, but there is scatter everywhere. So some people can have low expectancies and a high response, and vice versa. Fantasy proneness comes out about 0.2, and motivation, on average, around about 0.2. Now, you do get significant correlations with motivation, fantasy proneness and expectancy, and these replicate across a whole number of studies. Probably expectancy is about the best thing that we have. But even then, as I say, when you look across a whole bunch of studies, the correlations are about 0.3. And it's very hard to get better than 0.3 on any measure, correlating it with hypnotizability. In some individual study, you might find it, like here, we get 0.5. But if you look across replications, 0.3 is about the best you can get. Now, if expectancy is something important, you might say, is hypnosis just like a placebo? And indeed, there's something very similar in that placebo and hypnotic response are both to do with the powers of belief and suggestion on your experiences. Placebo occurs when you're told you will not feel any pain because an ointment has been rubbed on because you've taken a pill. In fact, no active medical agent has been given to you, but nonetheless, placebo pain relief can be extremely powerful. So is hypnosis the same as placebo? Well, Eric Woody looked at placebo alcohol. So you lace the rim of a glass with alcohol, so it smells like alcohol. But actually, there's no alcohol in the drink. Nonetheless, when you give people a drink and they're told it's alcohol, they feel lightheaded, they feel a little bit tipsy, and you get an alcohol response. People feel slightly drunk. Some people more than others, so we can see, does the extent to which people have a placebo alcohol response correlate with hypnotizability? Well, there is some relationship, but only about 0.2, 0.3 again. And as I say, 0.2, 0.3, well, that indicates there's something going on there, but there's a lot of variability. You could be a person who really doesn't show much placebo response at all and still be highly hypnotizable, and vice versa. And I show you those things because that's about the best we have for predicting hypnotic response when we look at measures that have been replicated across different labs and different studies, so we can have some confidence in them. Something to do with absorption, imaginative involvement, but that's not the full story. The correlation's really quite small. Expectation, motivation, yes, that's important, but it can't be the full story. It's not just expectation is the cause of hypnotic response. The correlation's not big enough. So, it still remains a bit of a mystery, and that's why hypnosis research is ongoing, including at Sussex and elsewhere around the world. So to summarise, hypnosis does not enhance memory. And hypnotizability, we can say some things hypnotizability is not being weak-willed, conformist. Some other things I haven't told you about, it's not being particularly good at concentration or particularly weak at concentration. It's not to do with attentional skills as far as we can measure. It's a little bit to do with expectations and motivations. But more than that, we do not know, and we need to do further research. Thanks very much. Thank you.